today to hear Dr. Leroy Hopkins, and I'm so happy. For those of you who don't know, I am Teresa St. Angelo, the director of the Winters Heritage House Museum. We have some distinguished board members here. I won't point them out because they probably don't want to be pointed out. But if they do, I'll point them out later. Anyway, we're excited to have this program today. So now, Dr. Hopkins, I don't know if I should read the whole thing to you. No, I always say this, but he's obviously, a very well learned man and lots of accolades. But he did work he was a professor at Millersville University, if I remember, German. And
just German.
German, okay. And I'm excited about his topic today, the Black Lancastrians in the Age of Revolution, from Bondage to Community. So without any more, let's turn it over to Dr. Leroy Hopkins.
Thank you. Now comes the danger. I have to use the technology. Disclaimer, I am not a historian. My specialty was German literature and civilization. I came to history, actually when I started at Millersville as an undergraduate, I studied history, it was my major, but it was so boring that I said, oh. I took German as a minor, excuse me, and then Russian came along, and I took that as the second major. And what pushed me towards German is then I spent my junior year abroad. Now, that's the title. Obviously, I'm not going to spot a T. And?
One more. And one more.
Aha, there we go. The beginning of slavery in Lancaster County begins in 1726. This year, Columbia Borough is celebrating its 300th anniversary. In 1726, Samuel Blunston, Samuel Bethel, and John Wright arrived in the Susquehanna. And of course, Columbia Borough was not erected until 1788. This is the will of Samuel Blunston from 1745. And I'm sure you can read it. Those in the back may have some problems. What he says there, this is an excerpt. All the rest of my Negroes who arrived at a full age, if they behave well, I order shall be set free at the end of 7 years after the date of this, and all younger Negroes and mulattoes not yet mentioned shall be free at the ages of 30 years respectively, as near as the time can be calculated. When he arrived, he had 2 enslaved Africans with him. When he died, we don't know how many. So the slave trade was active in Columbia. And there's the group that came. Blunston, Negro Peter, Negro Sal, H. Scarlett, L. Riley, and Devil, they were mechanics. They were going to build the settlement. John Wright, of course, and Prince, an Indian, because Native Americans lived in this area and they needed someone who could talk to them. Jerome Woods wrote probably the best book on Lancaster, early Lancaster. It's called Conestoga Crossroads, The Evolution of Lancaster, 1729 to 1790. According to his calculations, in 1750, there were 7 enslaved Africans. 56, there were 13, 1764, 28, 1775, just before the Revolution, there were 23. In 1779, excuse me, there were 54. And the reason for that sudden increase was because the people not the loyalists, but the colonists who were in Philadelphia, the British occupied Philadelphia. And so they came to Lancaster and brought their enslaved Africans with them. The Lancaster Revolutionaries, there were 12 of them. Of the 12, these number were slave owners. John Hubley had 1, Alexander Lowry 2, Adam Reichert, who owned the Grape Tavern, where the revolutionary met and discussed things. George Ross owned 3. Matthias Slough owned 3. One of probably was Dinah McIntyre, and we'll talk about her later. Jasper Yates owned 1. Edward Shippen, none are mentioned. My old buddy, Terry Madonna, wrote a book on Lancaster and the Revolution. And in it, he says that Shippen didn't have any slaves, but in the Gradual Abolition Act, which we'll look at, he says that he had 1. The Gradual Abolition Act was passed in 1780 with some trepidation. They tried it in 1779. Basically, it's what the name says. It was a gradual abolition. Now, why? Why did they want to do away with slavery? My theory, it's my hypothesis, there's no proof of this. How many of you watched the American Revolution on PBS? In 1775, Lord Dunsmore, who was the royal governor of Virginia, offered freedom to any African who would cross British lines. And I think this, 5 years later, is a response to that. Also, there was a sort of trepidation about having enslaved Africans, or even Africans around. In 1688, you had the Germantown protests against slavery. A group of Mennonites who were about to become Quakers warned the Quakers about having all of these enslaved people. And it wasn't out of benevolence. They were concerned about their own enterprise, because Africans who were enslaved in this country were brought from West Africa. And in West Africa, weaving was one of the skills. And that's exactly what the Germantowners excelled at. And then you had, there was a newspaper article that came out in 1763. The person who did it was named, I've forgotten his name. Well, he's not important. But he warned that what the Quaker merchants were doing in Philadelphia, they were avoiding the middleman, going directly to Africa, and not sending the enslaved Africans to the West Indies to be seasoned, in other words, to be broken. They were bringing them back. And Christopher Sauer, said that, look at the Carolinas. For every white person, there are 4 enslaved Africans, and all the whites are in constant fear of rebellion or insurrection. And so this is passed, and what it stipulated was that children of enslaved Africans born after March 1st, 1780, could serve until they were 28 years of age. Their parents were slaves for life. And here's one. Oh, and the other aspect of it, the passage of this law, it should be repealed, the Black Codes. The Black Codes were the laws that existed from 1702 to 1779, said that no more than a certain number of blacks could meet in a public place. They had to have identification if they were several miles away from their masters and so forth. This is one of the entries. Christopher Crawford of Lancaster Borough in the county of Lancaster, storekeeper, enters as owner. 1 Negro male named Bill, age 10 years, 6 months, slave for life. 1 Negro female named Esther, age 19, 6 months, slave for life. Funny, I'm getting a call from my church. Martha B. Clark was a librarian at the Lancaster County Historical Society. In 1911, the Historical Society decided to do something to commemorate the Christiana riot, as they called it then. They believed that it was their duty to honor the Quakers who started the Christiana resistance. Because even then they believed that blacks could not have done this. It had to be the Quakers, even though they were exonerated in the trial. She did a study of these returns from the Gradual Abolition Act. The Gradual Abolition Act was passed in 1780. It had to be amended in 1788 because of loopholes. One of the loopholes was, you're an enslaver, you have a slave who's pregnant. If you take her to Delaware, to Maryland, or to New Jersey, a slaveholding state, the child is born, you can bring both back as slaves for life. So the result of that was the number of slaves grew. In York County, from 1780 to 1783, the number of enslaved Africans doubled. And so they had to amend the act. Excuse me. Another loophole was the farmers, the German farmers in southwestern Pennsylvania said, why do we have to register our slaves? We're in Virginia. And they said, oh, no, you're in Pennsylvania. So that was a loophole. She does a study of this. In 1780, there were 807 enslaved Africans, 394 males, 412 females. The owners were Scotch-Irish. This area was a major slaveholding area. English, Germans, Huguenots, Welsh, and others. Concentrated in Donegal and Salisbury townships. That was according to her study. Now, what really got my interest peaked, last year I was asked by Rockford to write an essay on blacks in the Revolution. Jerome Wood says, there's not much to be found out. They were all enslaved, but there are some clues. He mentioned this. Taufe eines Negerknaben at the Lutheran Church, Holy Trinity Lutheran Church, and says, translated as baptism of the black boys. Well, obviously Jerome Wood doesn't know German, because Taufe eines Negerknaben is singular, it's not plural. So that for me raised the question, what was the relationship of Africans to the Germans in Lancaster? You realize from the time that Lancaster was organized, 1730, until about 1820, German was the majority language. At the end of that period, churches such as First Reformed and Trinity Lutheran gave up preaching in German, and out of that, other congregations were formed. St. Paul's Reformed and Zion Lutheran. So, because of my background and because of my good friend and colleague who's now deceased, how many of you knew Dick Beam? Charles Richard Beam, professor at Millersville, created the Center for Pennsylvania German Studies. From him, I found out about the Handwörterbuch des deutschen Aberglaubens, Handbook of German Superstitions, 10 volumes. I actually bought a copy of it. A little aside. I knew I had to look at this, and I knew Millersville had a copy. So I call. It's not. I looked in the catalog. It's not there. So I call a librarian, and I said, "Well, you don't have the book anymore. Is there any way you could rent it from the publisher in Berlin?" She said, "I don't think we would spend money for someone who no longer works here." And I said, I didn't say anything. I thought, now I know why I don't give money to Millersville anymore. Now, one of the things that's important, this is a book probably you're not familiar with, Martin Bernal, Black Athena. Has anyone heard of that? Sylvia does. Well, she's a historian. She would know it. The Afro-Asiatic Roots of Classical Civilization came out in 1987. And soon after that, he came to Millersville and gave a lecture. One of the things that he talks about is a shift in the paradigm in the 18th century, a shift from emphasizing Africa to India. And what he points out, if you read the Greek philosophers, all of them went to Africa first and then came back to Greece to philosophize. So that's where the education was. Instead, India is now more important. It has to do with the rise of scientific racism. Two of the steps in that direction, one is Johann Friedrich Blumenbach, I'll try your Latin, De Generis Humani Varietate Nativa, on the natural variety of mankind, which came out in 1775. Excuse me. He worked with Samuel Thomas von Sommering, who published Über die körperliche Verschiedenheit des Mohren von Europäer, Others, the physical difference of Moors from Europeans in 1784. Now, on what basis did they come up with these theories? If you saw the special American Revolution, what happened after Yorktown? Cornwallis, and how many Africans left? 10,000. Where did they go? Most of them went to Nova Scotia. 200 went with Baron von Riedesel to what is now Germany. And they were stationed in Kassel. I lived in Marburg, which is just south of Kassel. Kassel was a garrison town. And now what happens to someone in this 18th century who's from Virginia and goes to northern Germany? They die. Bad food, not enough shelter, diseases they're not used to. I was in Germany in 1989. Actually, I lived in Germany altogether 10 years. But in 1989, I had a grant from the German government, the DAD, Deutsche Akademische Austauschdienst, German Academic Exchange Service, to work on a study of Africans and African Americans in Europe, 1500 to the present. And the reason I applied for that, in 1983, I was a visiting scholar at Lafayette College, and I gave a talk on my dissertation, which was on Alfred Döblin's work in film and radio. And then also I was dabbling in history then, because from 1979 to 1996, I was a member of the Black History Advisory Committee of Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission. And one of the classes was canceled. So I had some time on my hands. So I went to their library and I picked up Bulletin of Negro History. I go, Black Hessians. I thought, what's this about? And it's about those men after the revolution who went with the Hessian mercenaries back to Europe. But what really caught my eye was, where was this research done? Marburg an der Lahn, my favorite town, my second home. So I got a sabbatical from Millersville. I had my regular pay, plus $10,000 from the German government. And so I spent 3 months in Germany, came back with 125 books, 10 kilos of Xeroxing, and some microfilm. And I'm still working through it. And these two men got the corpses of the people who died, the soldiers who died, and worked on them, measured their skulls and so forth. I bought a book for Lancaster history, because I was on the board then. Well, I still am on the board. It's called Hetrina, Heterina. That's an acronym for Hessische Truppen in Amerika, Hessian troops in America. And if you go through it, you'll see a name, and then after it, in parentheses, N. And N stands for Negar. And that's what happens in the 18th century. Before the end of the 18th century, anyone who was a person of color was called a Moor. That could be a North African, that could be an Indian. But then in the course of the 18th century, they become Negar, from the Latin meaning black. In other words, racial difference. Christopher Marshall was one of those people who fled Philadelphia when the British occupied it. He was an apothecary and a slaveholder and a Quaker, which was not an opposite, because you have to realize before the Revolution, most of the slaves held in southeastern Pennsylvania were owned by Quakers, because it was expensive to own someone, and who had the money? The Quakers did. This is from his diary, May 2nd, 1778. Some trouble to get persons to put the Negro woman into her coffin. Oh, what a wretched place is here, full of religious profession, but not a grain of love or charity except in words, in the generality of the German inhabitants. Buried Dinah, having yesterday invited the Negroes in Lancaster to attend the funeral. His servant, his maid, Dinah, an enslaved African, died. He couldn't find anyone to bury her. Now, from this period, you have to realize what Germans thought about blackness was it was evil. The devil was black. And you have Dinah McIntyre. Dinah was enslaved by Matthias Slau, the White Swan that's there where the convention center is. And Slau was one of those revolutionaries. Dinah supposedly was born in 1706. You have to take a grain of salt when you read about how old people got in the 18th and 19th centuries. She died in May of 1819, and even in the newspaper in Reading, Der Adler, which exists today as the Eagle, they said, oh, this is an amazing woman, is 113 years old. If you go, how many of you know Lancaster fairly well? 300 block of West Vine Street. My mother's generation called it Dinah's Hill. It was called Dinah's Hill because Dinah McIntyre lived up there. She owned 2 properties, 6,000 square feet. And where did she get this money? She was a fortune teller. And now who would come to her to have their fortune told? People who were superstitious. Germans and others. And of course, she used her income to purchase this land. Now, what happens after this period of enslavement? The Gradual Abolition Act meant that by 20 years or 28 years after 1780, there'd be freedom. That's not what happened. What happened is not only were the children of the enslaved Africans made indentured servants for life. Life expectancy for an African in 1800 was 20 years. Also their grandchildren. Finally, in 1830, the state Supreme Court said it was never the intention of the law to create a class in perpetuity, a servants class in perpetuity. So they ended the practice. Now, in terms of building community, this is from the Lancaster Journal, June 20th, 1817. People of color. At a meeting of about 50 persons of color in and about Lancaster at the house of James Clendenin on the 10th of June, 1817, it was resolved. 1, that we are desirous that the Reverend Daniel Coker and the other circuit preacher should pass through this town and preach to us once in 2 weeks. 2, that is our desire we should try to get a place of worship. 3, that James Clendenin, it's actually Clendenin, Edward Burgess and Jeremiah Bullard be a committee to act for us for 1 year, that they obtain some advice from some of the respectable citizens as our colored brethren have done in other neighboring towns. The committee made choice of Messrs. Walter Franklin, Robert Coleman, William Kirkpatrick, Charles Smith, William Jenkins, Adam Reigard, and George L. Mayer. Now, I could give you a lecture of about 2 hours just on this. Why James Clendenin? James Clendenin shows up 3 years later. In 1820, the Negro Entry Book was created. There were suspicious fires in Harrisburg. And of course, who do you blame crime on? Vagrants and blacks back then. We don't have the vagrants now. Oh, we do, homeless. Yeah, homeless and blacks, they're the ones that always doing things. Well, James Clendenin is the first person who registered. You had to pay 1.5 cents to register. Failure to register at the mayor's office was a fine of $1 a day. And in 1820, $1 a day that's big bucks. And he enters, James Clendenin, a bright mulatto about 64 years of age, enters that he's a painter and glazier by trade. A glazier is someone who makes window panes. Lives in his own house on Middle Street, that's Howard Avenue today. Lives with his wife, Hannah, and 2 unrelated children, William Clendenin, who's learning these trades, and then a young woman, and she's going to be a servant. She's 10 years old. And I wrote an article about this. If you're interested in it, it's probably online. Lancaster History published it in 1984. The entries were kept from 1820 to 1849, and I wrote an essay on the first year of 1820, and covered 89.7% of the black population in Lancaster. There's more information on black Lancastrians in that book than on anyone else in the borough at that time. So they met at Clendenin's house. Why his house? He was a glazier, which meant he had rich clients. So he was a intermediary. And the others, Edward Burgess. Burgess was a waiter. He worked for Amos Slaymaker, who had a tavern on King Street, East King Street. And that's where the congregation met. And by the way, that congregation is my church. I'm a member of Bethel AME Church, African Methodist Episcopal Church. We were organized in 1817. In the first directory, which was 1843, we're listed as St. James African Church. And the reason for that is you look at the names at the bottom, Walter Franklin, Robert Coleman, William Kirkpatrick. These are members of St. James and Trinity Lutheran. So there's some sort of control there until 1843. But in 1848, trustees of the church chartered the church as the African Methodist Episcopal Church in Lancaster. And this is the beginning of community. To organize, especially African Americans, when they organize, first thing they do is they set up a church. And then the clubs come around. It's said about Germans, treffen sich zwei Deutsche im Ausland, gründen sie einen Verein. Who understands German? If treffen sich zwei Deutsche im Ausland, gründen sie einen Verein. If two Germans meet, if two Germans who live outside of Germany meet, they start a club. Well, we start churches. Now, Daniel Coker was one of the founders of the AME Church in Baltimore. He could not come because he was kicked out of the church. He was pushing colonization. The American Colonization Society went public January 1st, 1817, and its purpose was to get all free blacks out of the country and repatriate them to Africa. And there was a meeting in March of 1817 at Mother Bethel. That's our main church in Philadelphia. James Forten, was mentioned in the documentary on the Revolution. He was the one who was he made sales. He was captured, put in a prison ship, and then later became very wealthy. He chaired that meeting, and what they said was, we built this country with our blood, sweat, and tears. We're not going anywhere else. And so Coker was kicked out. The persons who actually came, one was David Smith and Shadrach Menkins. Shadrach, I've forgotten his name, Shadrach Bassett. And I know that from the autobiography of David Smith, which you have to take with a grain of salt because he wrote it when he was 90 years old. And he's trying to remember things that happened 80 years before. But he was following a plan set up by Daniel Coker. And the plan was, and it's mentioned there, he said, do that as our colored brethren have done in other neighboring towns. Coker had visited Lancaster, Columbia, Wrightsville, York, and that's what they did. You get a committee of respectable, wealthy whites to approve your plan. The idea was to get approval and financial support, and then you start your church. Well, they got the approval, but they didn't get the finances. So what happened, the church was built by 1818, but they had to take a lien out on it. There are two sheriff's liens. They owed $462. And James Clendenin became responsible for those two liens. Now, what we know about the early church, the first woman who was ordained to preach by Richard Allen, who actually became the first bishop, Coker was actually chosen, but he declined, probably because of his light complexion. He was a mulatto. He ends up going to Liberia where he died. Well, what happens is once the church is set up, Jarena Lee is the first woman ordained by Richard Allen. And she comes to Lancaster 1823 and says the church was locked up. The owner wouldn't let her in. And we don't know if that's Clendenin or someone else. Clendenin himself died in 1829. And what's interesting, he was baptized not at this church, but at St. James, and he was buried from St. James. So he was loyal to them. Our cemetery at Bethel was in use from 1817 to 1906. And if you look in the pastoral records of St. James, it says this person was buried with the Black Methodists. One of the things that I've discovered in research in this period is the denominational lines were very fluid. It was not as strict as today. And I think that's the end. Oh, this is the charter from 1848. I won't, I have problems reading it too. But if you look, one of the people who signed it, George James. George James was a trustee at Bethel, which is the name of the church after 1860. And he's the one who approached the Common School Board in October of 1839 and asked for an African school. And the African school was built. It was sent throughout the area. If you know at Lancaster, the corner of Farnham and South Queen, that's where the Quaker meeting was back then. And that's where a ecumenical school was held in 1815, 1816. And what's amazing is that half of the Black population of Lancaster in 1815, which is about 100 out of 200, went to that school, men, women, and children. And so they met there briefly. And then eventually in the 1840s, a building was built at Bethel. $150 was allocated by this Common School Board. And there was one of the teachers there was a man who was a member. He was a minister in the Union African Methodist Episcopal Church, which was started by Peter Spencer in Wilmington, Delaware. It was incorporated in 1813. Spencer was there in 1816 when the AME Church was created. The AME Church is a corporate church. There were 5 churches that came together, and they selected a leader who's a bishop. In the UAME Church, which is now AUMP, there are no bishops. You have elders. And Lewis Porter Hood was one of the persons who brought that discipline to Lancaster County. And how many of you are familiar with Rigby? Anyone heard of Rigby? Fulton Township, camp meeting, existed from 1837 up till COVID, and now started over again. In the 1890s, 8,000 people would go to the camp meeting there, black and white. And Lewis Porter Hood is the one who started that church in 1832. And then he goes on. He's the teacher at the African school next to my church. He's later the pastor of the UAME Church on Charlotte Street, which started out as Isaac Gilmore's African church in that 1843 directory. And then he's also the pastor at the UAME Church in Columbia, which is not unusual. Most of the pastors were on a circuit because you didn't have enough people. If you have a church this size, you can't feed the pastor. He has to have a side hustle. Do something here, do something there. And what Lewis Hood did, he made hominy and sold it in Lancaster. His son went on to be rather famous, Solomon Porter Hood, who graduated from the African school, went to Lincoln University, was a Presbyterian minister, and then he saw the light, became an AME minister. And he was the plenipotentiary to Liberia. He was appointed by President Harding, served from 1921 to 1925. So I think that completes. Yep, that's it. Thank you for your attention. Any questions? I'm going to sit down. My 2 artificial knees are telling me. Someone back there has a question?
Just a comment, the one slide that you showed, a list of slave owners in Lancaster. You mentioned Rockford, but I didn't see Rahan's name.
Oh, he's in the list.
Oh, okay.
There's something like 200 names. I couldn't get it on the slide.
Okay.
Because the 808 were owned by quite a few. And you'll find some who are not in 1780, but in 1788. The number of enslaved Africans increased, and most were in Lancaster Borough and out in the farm areas. I've looked at I've written an article on Drumore Township. I was interested in Drumore because my grandfather lived there in 1900. And then 1908, my father was born in East Drumore. I've also written about Conestoga. My mother's from Conestoga. I've written about Columbia, Lancaster. I can't say I've never written anything on the Underground Railroad, but I'm going to have to because I'm president of the board of the Underground Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania. So I got to do something. We're going to start it in Columbia, and right now I'm writing a talk that I'm going to give on May 21st at the Watch and Clock Museum in Columbia on Stephen Smith and William Whipper. And I'm doing something that until now has not been done, is I call it Partners for Profit and Social Justice, Stephen Smith, William Whipper, A Tale of Three Communities. I'm looking at Columbia, Philadelphia, and Dresden, Ontario. Both Stephen Smith and William Whipper were involved in the creation of the Dawn Colony. They bought considerable land there. Their families did. Their friends bought. It's erroneous, but in 1870, there's an article, I think it's in the Lancaster Intelligencer. It says that William Whipper's holdings in Canada have a value of $300,000. Now, you could buy an acre of land for $1 back then. And some question about whether 300,000 is correct, but he owned a huge swath of Dresden. I've been working with a researcher there named Marie Carter, who published a book called In the Light of Dawn. It's the history of the Dawn Colony. And what is interesting is that I mentioned Richard Allen. In the 1820s in Ohio, a law was passed that would if it had been enforced, would have forced all blacks out of Ohio. Fearing something like that would happen in Pennsylvania, Richard Allen called for a colored convention, it was called. They met in Philadelphia in 1830. And there are two issues that came up. One was colonization in Canada, because remember, in 1808, England had banned the Atlantic slave trade, and in 1833 they did away with slavery in the empire. And so there was some hope that they could start a colony in Upper Canada, Ontario. And then the other issue was education, because education is a part of our church life. It's something that we promote. Well, we used to promote it. We're doing it again to a certain extent. Depends on resources and so forth. And of course, one of the things that came from the effort to start they wanted to start a college, but they started a school in New Haven, and the mistake was made that it was mixed, and the New Havenites burnt the school down, and the school teacher just escaped with her life. That was 1830s. But what is fascinating is that Lancaster County history is not just Lancaster County history. It's regional, it's national, it's international. Ontario was a place to visit. There's a book, Charles Drew wrote a book in 1859. It's called A North Side View of Slavery. He visited St. Catharines, Buxton, Chatham, all in Ontario. And he interviewed people. And one former fugitive said that he was grateful to the Dutch who had helped him. Now, by the Dutch, he meant the Mennonites from Lancaster County who settled in Queensbush. And Queensbush is where Christian Eby led Mennonites at the beginning of the 19th century. The river there, the main river, is called what? Conestoga. Yeah, in 2000, but actually in 1998, 1999, 2000, 2001, my colleague Tracy Weiss got NEH money. Think of that, to look at a race issue. Impossible today. And what we did was we had a video conference with Buxton, which was created, the Elgin settlement was created in 1849 by Lord Elgin to harbor freedom seekers who came from the United States. And my question to, it was Brian and Shannon Prince. I said, would it be possible to come to visit? Oh, yeah, sure. So in 2000, we made a dreadful mistake. We took a van from Millersville. There were 3 faculty, and we had 6 teenagers. Oh, are we there yet? I have to go to the bathroom. I'm hungry. I'm thirsty. 12-hour drive. And it was fascinating. I heard what happens, homecoming is Labor Day weekend. And the descendants of freedom seekers go back to Canada, and professors from the colleges and universities give talks. Well, I listened to one talk. It was given by a Professor Stauffer. I walked up to him afterwards. I said, you know, Stauffer is a Lancaster County name. He said, I know. We're from Lancaster. So he was probably one of the Mennonites.
In your research, the fluidity between denominations, would that maybe have been a benefit, a detriment, or neutral?
It was a benefit. Let me tell you, I mentioned the UAME Church, Union African Methodist Episcopal Church. Excuse me. In the 1843 directory for Lancaster, there's Isaac Gilmore's African Church. Isaac Gilmore was a chimney sweep. He shows up in the Negro entry book. He's taking on apprentices. His father is Isaac Gilmore. All of the Gilmore children, 8 of them, were baptized at St. James Episcopal Church in 1800. One, Ralph, was born in 1806. He's baptized that year. Ralph goes on to be a chimney sweep. If you read his obituary, he died in 1893. It says that, he was known locally, but they don't know where he was from. I thought, you don't know where he's from? He lived here all his life. I looked in the Wilmington newspaper. I live in Ancestry, by the way, and newspapers.com. On newspapers.com, I have access to 1.2 billion newspaper pages, searchable database. And in it, it said that this David Gilmore from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, was one of the successors to Peter Spencer. He was the equivalent of a bishop. Now, what's interesting, his wife, Maria, is buried in our cemetery. His daughter, Susan, taught in the Sunday school at the AME church. She's buried in our cemetery. When he died, he's buried in our cemetery. That was fluidity of the denominations, but also was necessity, because there was no place to bury blacks except our cemetery. We were the only cemetery in the city where blacks could be buried. And when it became full in 1906, Edward Millen and some others, same pattern. He got an insurance man, another person who was in real estate, and they bought land. And originally, they looked at land on Fruitville Pike, and the neighbors were up in arms. We don't want even dead blacks in our neighborhood. This is 1900. And so they bought land along South Duke Street, it's 1400 block. It's called Stevens Greenland Cemetery. And of course, it's named after Thaddeus Stevens. When it was dedicated in 1907, Mayor McCaskey, J.P. McCaskey, spoke. He was a friend of Stevens and a great admirer. And my grandparents are buried there, my mother's parents, and my mother's brother, who I got to know, Uncle Rodney Isaac Pico, was a Buffalo soldier, served in World War I. But like the Buffalo soldiers in World War I, he was not allowed to go overseas. He served in Texas against Pancho Villa. And also, I think in his record, it said he was sent to the Philippines. And the reason they didn't send him is because of two incidents, Brownville and the Houston race riot. And my uncle was actually subpoenaed for the race riot, the Houston race riot. His unit, he was in the 24th U.S. Cavalry. And they had killed, I think, 50 whites there. It was provoked because one of the men went into town. Well, first of all, they never should have sent black troops to Houston, one of the most racist towns around, and in that time. But today, maybe not so much. But they went. This guy goes in town and he sees two police officers, beating a black woman. He asked, "What did she do?" They beat him and arrested him. His buddy comes back and asks, "Where's my friend?" They shoot at him. He goes back to the camp. They break into the arsenal, take their guns, shoot it up. And what's talk about a miscarriage of justice? These are military men. They were tried in civil courts, which is, and there were two trials. 14 of the men were hanged. And the rest got life in prison. My uncle just escaped. He was exonerated. And so what happened instead, they took volunteers. And I wrote an article about that. It's called, what is it? Holding Back the Night. And it's about local men black men who served in World War I. A group came from Bill Meyer. I'm sure you're familiar with Bill Meyer. And it was interesting. I'm just exchanging emails with the executive director of the Salisbury Township Historical Society. She asked me about were there any noted writers or artists, African American ones from the township, and I told her about Lila Miller, who was a poet, and her poems were published in the Lancaster newspaper in the 1920s. Her two brothers, Ezekiel and John Miller, served in World War I. And I was really interested in Ezekiel Harry Miller, born 1890. And he had gone to Howard University. So he had a college degree before he went off. He served in artillery. But after the war, it was unbelievable. He got a master's degree from Columbia University. And I found in the Crisis magazine, edited by W.E.B. Du Bois, that he got a stipend of $1,600 a year in 1923 for his doctoral work. He got a PhD from the University of Dijon in Paris, and then came back and ended up teaching at the HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities. And I thought, I think find out more about him. I found that he wrote a novel. I read it. It was terrible. I read it. I thought, oh, no, I sent it back. Got an interlibrary loan. Apparently, he also wrote some poems. But coming from Lancaster County, rural Lancaster County, and then getting a PhD in France, he taught English and French at Atlanta University. He ended up in Alabama. His brother died in 1975, and it said that his brother was in Alabama. Well, the brother was older than John. I knew John's son. His name was Oswald Miller, and Oswald gave me some information. He's also deceased. He was a member of Mount Horeb Lodge, number 14, Freemasons, Prince Hall Freemasons. My grandfather was a master mason, no, more than a master. He was the I'll say it in German, Meister vom Stuhl, the head of the lodge. Well, what Oswald gave me was something that his aunt, Leila Miller, wrote about. Anne Jane Craig, who supposedly lived to be 125. She remembered carrying water for Washington's troops. And her son is buried at Stevens Greenland, Samuel Craig. And it's like, really? And they're interrelated. And So it's fascinating. Genealogy is a rabbit hole. You follow things. In doing this article or this talk on Smith and Whipper, one of the things that's not clear is some will say William Whipper married Stephen Smith's daughter, but they had no children. So how could he marry your daughter? Now, I found an announcement from the Lancaster paper of 1836. He married Stephen Smith's adopted daughter. No. Well, in 1850, William Whipper is living in Columbia. In his household is Stephen Smith, car agent, and his wife Mary. I'm thinking, well, this is spelled differently. It's E-V-E-N, not E-P-H-E-N. Well, I found out that Stephen Smith rather, died soon after that. His widow moves to Dresden, is wealthy, owns a grocery store, and she becomes the third wife of William Whipper's brother-in-law. I'm thinking, his brother-in-law was Jacob B. Hollingsworth. That's another thing. Spelling is optional. When you look at, he spelled his name Hollensworth, Hollingsworth. His father, who lived in Columbia, spelled it Hollingsworth, I-N-G-S worth, and which makes it like, are they related? Yeah, they are. But it's fascinating. Well, I don't want to keep you all afternoon. Any other questions? Thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
You're comfortable in that chair.
Yeah, this is nice here.
Thank you so much. Thank you,
Oh, sure.
Dr. Hopkins.
Oh, let me give you this.
I just wanted to say we do have Thaddeus Stevens coming. And those of you who have joined us before have probably heard me. Do you know Ross Hedrick?
Oh, yes, he was at the open house on
Yeah.
Saturday.
Yeah, I thought he
Did
was.
any of you go to the open house of the Thaddeus Stevens, Lady Hamilton Smith house? Well, it's going to cost you $20 now to get in.
Oh, yeah.
But I think it's going to be open certain first Fridays free. I'm on the board of Lancaster History, and I was involved with the creation of the center. It's wonderful. 25,000 square feet. It's the best museum in our region. Well, it's not a museum, it's a center for history and democracy.
Do you have an area for speakers like this for programs?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah,
There's three
okay.
stories. There's three whole stories.
I'll rent the bus, folks.
And be careful, some of the exhibits you'll hear me speaking. Why, that's what I said. We had a tour ahead of time. I thought, I knew that voice. Oh, that's me.
Well, Ross is coming here on May 20th. He'll be here at 1 and then 6:30 performing as Thaddeus Stevens. So, yeah, we're excited about that.
I'm sure he'll tell you some of Stephen's humor. He was very humorous.
Really looking forward to that. And then, of course, we have architectural tours we just started. We have Dr. Caitlin Obitz. She had her first tour this past Saturday, and it's from 3 to 4. And the folks that were on her tour highly recommended her. And she gives historical facts as well as the architectural features of Elizabethtown. So if you want to join, please join in. Our next speaker, well, that's okay if it's on, is Nelson Polite, right?
Yes.
Yes.
President of our African American Historical Society.
So we're excited about that too. So again, help yourselves, take something home. We'll put some Ziploc bags out. How about another nice round of applause for Thank you so much.